Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with definitely not a MAC-10. This, I will have you know, is an SAP M10. This is a semi-automatic pistol, and it happens to be exactly based on the MAC-10. So the story here is the original military armaments company, MAC, went out of business in 1976. And all of its assets were sold at auction. They were bought up by a conglomerate of three former employees by the names of Roby, Pitts, and Brueggemann, who formed RPB with the plans to take over production. And they didn't do it very well. Long story short, or short story shorter, they ended up selling the whole thing within 2 years, in 1978, to a guy named Wayne Daniels. Wayne Daniels knew what he was going to do with this company. You see, in 1978, you could still legally manufacture and register transferable machine guns in the United States. You couldn't import foreign machine guns, but you could make them here in the country. But the problem was there was still the whole transfer stamp NFA requirement, which was way more intrusive. It was a much more complex process in the 1970s than it is today. You didn't have online e-forms. People were a lot less knowledgeable about the process, and of course there was a $200 tax on the transfer of a machine gun. MAC-10 is a machine gun, there's a $200 tax on it, but the gun itself in the 70s is selling for like $100. It's not a whole lot of people are willing to pay that and go through the process to get a full auto MAC-10. So what Wayne Daniels decides to do is make a semi-automatic version, and he takes the standard MAC M10 and converts it to semi-auto, still using an open bolt. It's a very simple conversion. I'll show you the difference between a semi-auto and a full auto in a moment. But he submits this to ATF, and he gets approval on April 11th, 1978 for his semi-automatic, SAP semi-automatic pistol, M10. Proceeds to start manufacturing these as both pistols and carbines in all three calibers, .380, 9mm, and .45 ACP. And this extremely quickly, like immediately, becomes the best-selling product for the new RPB associates. So let's take a look at what it actually was and how it worked. One of the MAC family pistols' claim to fame is that it's extremely compact for the amount of firepower it offers. Like, there it is compared to a Browning high-power pistol. The frame is about the same length. You got a little bit of barrel sticking out. It's not nearly as nice of a gun to handle and shoot as a high power, obviously. This is like a gigantic steel brick on top of a little stick. But that was the marketing. Anyway, if we take a look at the markings here, we have SAP semi-automatic pistol M10, caliber 9mm, PAR, that's for Parabellum, made by RPB Industries. They already had a whole bunch of receiver flats stamped M10, so they just added on the SAP here when they made these as semi-autos. There's the Cobra logo. That is the coolest possible animal. It is a hybrid of a cobra and a stingray. How 80s is that? Then we have a serial number out here on the front. 81 is the date of production. There are three different styles of serial number you'll see here. The early ones, and the vast majority of them, have a serial number that starts with SAP for semi-automatic pistol, and then a number starting at 9,000 and going up to like 95,000. There were then additional production runs in 1981 and 82 that have serial number ranges like this. All right, for operation, this fires from an open bolt, so you would cock it open, you'd have a magazine in there, of course, and you'd pull the trigger to fire it. Bolt goes forward, chambers round, immediately fires. It's got a fixed firing pin. And then recoil, this is a simple blowback action, is going to blow the bolt back, and it will lock open again. The trigger mechanism on this was, you could call it forced reset trigger, although not in the context of how we see forced reset trigger today. It's not a faux machine gun. In this case, it doesn't really quite work when you dry fire it. It does work for live fire, but if you're just dry firing it, you have to manually reset the trigger to fire a second time. So if I hold the trigger down, it still locks open. It is, as it's built, it is legitimately a semi-automatic open bolt firing gun. By the way, there is also a safety here. If you rotate the charging handle 90 degrees, it locks the handle, locks the bolt in place. And on an open bolt firing gun, the safe position is when the bolt is closed. because there can't be a round in the chamber. It would have fired when the bolt closed. Anyway, let's go ahead and disassemble this guy. I deliberately left this a bit loose, so this would be easy. We have one cross pin in the front, just like every other Mac. Instead of a split pin, this is a threaded together pin. So pull that out. Then I can pull the upper assembly off. This is essentially identical to a regular full auto Mac. We have a fixed firing pin right there. We have a sear notch right here. That's what locks the bolt open, ready to fire. And the idea of this was to make a semi-auto gun with the minimal possible required number of changes to the full auto system. So for comparison's sake, I have a full auto M10. This is actually a 45 caliber M10. From the outside on the right, you can see that this has a pin here. The semi-auto one does not. And if I flip them over, that's our selector switch, semi and full. And there is no selector switch on the semi-auto gun. Now, the way a full auto MAC-10 trigger works, you have a sear right here. When you pull the trigger, that sear drops. That sear is holding the bolt right here, so when it drops, the bolt can go forward. That's it. That's what it's doing. When I put it into semi-auto, we have a disconnector right here that pops up. So that's full auto, that's semi-auto. And what happens is that gets hit by the bolt. So the bolt's back here, I pull the trigger, bolt goes forward, it hits this, which just physically forces the trigger and the sear, well, forces the sear back up, forces the trigger forward. This is sort of a trigger slap style of disconnector. If you had one of those early American AK fire control groups that would physically like hurt when you fired it because the trigger was pushing back into your finger, that's kind of what you're getting here. Then, of course, if you want full auto, you just rotate the selector over and it cams that disconnector down so it's below the level of the bolt and it doesn't do anything. So in the semi-auto version, get ready for this, there's just no way to pivot the disconnector down. They've added this little metal tray that holds these components, so that tray doesn't exist in the full auto gun. And whenever you pull the trigger, oops, there we go, I have to reset it. When you pull the trigger, that disconnector stays up and it's just going to physically push the trigger and the sear back up, thus making the gun semi-auto. I will leave it to your imagination what is involved to make that work as full auto. And there you go, there is the RPB Associates semi-automatic pistol SAP M10 in 9mm field strength. You still do have a selector switch here for safe and fire. Now, because these are semi-auto pistols, they can't have shoulder stocks. On the full auto version, there's no restriction on a stock or overall length. Like there is no such thing as an SBR if the gun's full auto, it's just a machine gun. So the original Macs have a setup like this in the back to allow a really chintzy collapsing wireframe stock. They just left that element off of the semi-automatic pistols. So you can see the back end of the stock is sort of bent, or the back end of the lower is bent for it. You got a hole down here for the stock release button, but the back plate is solid, so the stock won't attach. But as much as possible, they did everything they could to maintain all the standard parts and manufacturing. So these do take standard normal magazines in all three calibers, same mags as the full auto ones. Production kicked off really fast. This proved to be a quite popular gun. By 1982, RPB had manufactured 125,000 of these things. The most common popular version was the 9mm pistol, like this guy. They did like something on the order of 94,000 of those. 45 ACP was a distant second at 21,000 produced, and then 380 about half as many as that. So they're doing really well on this thing. Like it's a cheap gun to make. I'm sure Wayne Daniels did quite well financially on this. The problem for him and for a lot of people was that this turns out to actually be, no shocker here, really easy to convert to full auto. And a lot of people would buy it in this form and then do a little magic machine shop work, and presto, make a machine gun out of it. This attracted the attention of law enforcement and, in turn, the BATF. ATF on May 20th, 1982, issued Ruling 82-2, which determined, contrary to their prior approval in 1978, now determined that these things were in fact machine guns. Now, existing guns were going to be grandfathered. That's why something like this is still considered legally a semi-automatic pistol today. But 1 month after publication of this new ruling, which would be June 21, 1982, all new production would be legally considered machine guns and would have to be registered, tax stamped, etc. So Wayne Daniels used this opportunity to shut down RPB. The company just folded. I suspect this was an opportunity to get rid of any sort of debt that was on the company books, because he immediately refounded the company under the new name of SWD, which is Sylvia Daniels, his wife. Those are her initials. And they would go on producing guns. What they did to get around ATF's decision was redesign the gun to fire from a closed bolt with a different firing mechanism. And in fact, the guy who actually did the design for that was one Max Aitchison, whose name you may recognize from a number of interesting 1980s firearms designs. So they bring him in, he does a semi-auto closed bolt version, and that becomes one of the main products for SWD going forward. So RPB technically lasted from 1976 until 1982. It was run very successfully by Wayne Daniels from 78 to 82, and this was their primary product. So I thought it would be really cool to give you guys a look at one of these grandfathered open bolt semi-auto Macs. Big thanks to Morphe's for giving me access to it to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Well, Christmas was yesterday, and I hope everyone had a fantastic holiday. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, my family never had any idea what to get me that was cool and gun-related, because they didn't know what I had and what I didn't and what I was interested in. And if you're in that boat, well, maybe today is the day to treat yourself to something super cool from Headstamp Publishing. We have a huge assortment of different firearms collectible books available and shipping right now from our website at headstamppublishing.com. We have, on the serious gun collector side, we have my first book, Chassepot de Famas. We have Jonathan Ferguson's book, Thornycroft SA-80 on British bullpup rifles. We have Rifles on the Danube about Hungarian AKs. We have Clockwork Basilisk about Elisha Collier's early self-cocking revolvers. Super cool, or self-rotating single-action revolvers. We have 2 cool books on the subject of Japan. We have one on Japanese tobacco from World War II and the pre-war period, as well as one on Japanese imperial swords. And then, of course, we have our best sellers, which are Battle Rifles of NATO. This has just recently arrived in the warehouse, in stock, shipping now. Looking like it's actually going to sell out pretty quickly. We're going to have to do a reprint on this at some point. We have our 2 current World War II series books available right now. We have Guns of the Soviet Union and Guns of the United States from World War II, as well as, of course, Pistols of the Warlords, my second book. So tons of stuff. There's a whole bunch of other small material, patches, stickers, bookmarks, small pamphlet-y books, things like Who Invented the Wheel Gun? Tons of cool stuff to take a look at over at Headstamp Publishing. So if you're kind of a little sad that you didn't get anything really cool for Christmas, but you can't tell anyone that, well, head over to Headstamp and get yourself something nice.